Welcome to this lecture on 19th century literature. The Romantic period begins from 1798 and ends in 1832. A significant shift in taste of literature and attitude towards literature was taking place throughout Europe in the latter part of the 18th century. In 18th century, Dryden and Pope had insisted that the language of poetry should be based on the conversation of gentlemen. On the contrary, Wordsworth was of the view that it should be based on the conversation of peasants. In 1800, Wordsworth wrote in preface to lyrical ballads, humble and rustic life was generally chosen because in that condition the essential passions of the heart find a better soil in which they can attain their maturity, are less under restraint, and speak a plainer and more emphatic language. Because in that condition of life, our elementary feelings coexist in a state of greater simplicity and consequently can be more accurately contemplated and more forcibly communicated. The new approach towards literature was to look beyond the polished life of educated men in cities to wilder and cruder ways of living, to the imaginative world of the supernatural, and to the everyday world of ordinary people. Language of poetry as spoken by common people, everyday world of ordinary people as the themes. The first poet to be discussed is William Blake. William Blake was born in 1757 and he died in 1827. He broke away from the existing tradition of poetry. His poems in Poetical Sketches, published in 1783, have a lyrical touch. His famous Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience show the two contrary states of the human soul. Songs of Innocence depict childhood and innocence. When the voices of children are heard on the green, and laughing is heard on the hill, my heart is at rest within my breast, and everything else is still. Songs of Experience depict the corruption of innocence by the immoral forces of society. William Blake was a visionary and he got influenced by many mystical thinkers. In his works, he protests against repression of all kinds and advocates for freedom. Next poet is William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth was born in 1770 and he died in 1850. William Wordsworth is also known as the poet of nature, as his romanticism lies in nature. He brought a new approach to the writing of English poetry. He objected to a gaudy poetic diction and he preferred language of common people in poetry. He also preferred simple incidents and humble people as subjects. rather than heroic or grand themes. The book Lyrical Ballads was planned with Coleridge in 1797. It was published in 1798 with 4 poems by Coleridge and 19 by Wordsworth. This book marks the beginning of Romantic movement. Another famous poem written by Wordsworth is the Prelude, which is a long autobiographical account of his own development. It was first published in its final form posthumously in 1850. The poem highlights the growth of the mind of the poet. Next poet is Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He was born in 1772 and he died in 1834. He was both poet and critic. He collaborated with William Wordsworth in the book Lyrical Ballads. His famous poems are The Ancient Mariner and Kubla Khan. They are in the genre of magical symbolic poetry. They are romantic in their imagination. The poem Kubla Khan begins as In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure-dome decree, whereout the sacred river ran, through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. In his poem France an Ode, Coleridge depicts his disillusionment with the course of the French Revolution. As a critic, Coleridge wrote Biographia Literaria. He differentiated between primary imagination and secondary imagination, as secondary imagination is more conscious than primary imagination. The employment of secondary imagination is, in the larger sense, a poetic activity. Coleridge differentiates between science and poetry, as science is related to truth, whereas poetry is related to pleasure. Coleridge also made a distinction between imagination and fancy. This is the end of the first part of 19th century literature.